All right. All right. So welcome back to part two. Okay. So when we look at some of the other specific rights, you don't have to write these down. Okay. Bills of attainder. So we can't punish people through a law. Congress can't pass a law that punishes a person or a group without a trial. There's no titles of nobility. Nothing huge. We guarantee trial by jury. We protect our citizens as you move from one state to another. You have rights as you travel, and you have the right to travel. Okay. We protect against the use of treason to restrict other activities. And then the limitation on the punishment for treason is it's very hard to prove treason. Once you're convicted of treason, you can get the death penalty. But we make it that you have to have so many witnesses, you have to so much, and that's specifically written out there because we want to make sure that treason is not just used in general terms because that's what they used to do back in medieval times. Hey, you always have a Republican form of government, meaning that you get to vote for representatives, not that you're conservative. Okay, no religious tests, and we'll talk about that when we get to we'll talk about it more with the First Amendment, but there's no religious test to make you hold federal office, which is kind of ironic that the Constitution specifically says no religious tests to hold office, but some of the presidential candidates are talking about religious tests to become a citizen. Okay, a little conflict there. And then protection against impairment of contracts or forbids states from passing laws that affect or effectively invalidate a contract. Okay, so a state cannot use a law to break a legally obtained contract. So they can't use that to circumvent a business, something like that. We don't see those too often because they're established in the original Constitution. Okay, so when we go back to this term of selective incorporation, I know this may be a little hard to see. Okay, but this idea is courts have made a ruling that establishes how liberty would be applied by both the federal and state governments to our society. Okay, so this was established in the 14th Amendment. It sat there for roughly 50 years. Okay, nobody really did anything. Nobody really thought about it. Originally, the states were separate entities from the federal government. So the states did not actually have to uphold the Bill of Rights. That was a federal government responsibility. And so if a state did something or passed a law that lined up with their state constitution, most people just accepted it. And that's why these court cases are so important, because the states would do whatever, and if nobody questioned it, nobody challenged it, there was no issue. And their government would say, well, look, the federal Bill of Rights, that applies to the federal government. That doesn't apply to us here in Ohio. That's just stupid. Our state constitution is what applies to us here in Ohio. So it wasn't until later, after the Civil War, 14th Amendment gets passed, the Supreme Court in 1925, that's the first big case, which is Gitlow versus New York. Okay, and that's a freedom of speech case. Okay, and you get to study those. And they basically start saying, no, states cannot take away the guaranteed right of an American citizen for freedom of speech. And then we get to fair trials, and then we get into some cases dealing with religion, church and state, and then we just keep growing, and you can see they kind of start becoming faster and faster and faster and faster. And now almost every ruling would be considered a selective incorporation rule. Now the key thing is, without a court case and a challenge in the court with the federal courts ruling that this is the way that it has to be in the Supreme Court, the states can still do what they want. You have to have that case. Without the court case and the court ruling, then there isn't a federal statute or ruling or case to go by. It's left open. So not everything is applied through selective incorporation, because there's some things that we just accept. This is the way they are. This is the way it is. And unless somebody challenges it and gets the courts to come in and change the ruling or adjust the rulings, then that's the way it's going to stay. Okay, and so that's why these are so important to understand. Okay, so understanding that without the cases, nothing changes. Now, that may not always be a bad thing, because sometimes the court cases may change it in a way that you don't like, but without those cases, nothing changes. And in order to force the states to address these issues, okay, so the Supreme Court has to step in. And that's where you saw this with gay marriage. Okay, you had a lot of states that started doing different things. And then you had district courts and circuits that started doing stuff. Okay, gay marriage in Massachusetts has been illegal for over a decade. Some states went to civil unions. Some states like Ohio just kept it outlawed. Okay, and then the federal government finally came and said, boom, this is the new ruling. This is the way that it is. And you still have people fighting it. And you're always going to have that group of people that may not agree with it, and so they keep fighting it and trying to argue this is how it should be and challenge it. But as long as the federal government's in agreement and it's a civil liberty or civil right situation, the states can only fight it so far before they're going to lose. It just takes time. It's the same thing when you think back to the civil rights and we had to send in the National Guard and we had to deal with this ruling or that ruling. One of the things that's not understood about Brown versus the board, now you guys will learn and have to research Brown versus the board 1, but there was something that's called Brown versus the board 2. And so Brown versus the board 1 said separate but equal, inherently unequal. You have to desegregate. You have to provide equal education. And a whole bunch of Southern schools said, oh, yeah, we're working on it. Oh, we're trying. It takes time. We got to figure this out and we got to figure that out. And we're not for sure how to answer this question, but we're trying. We're going to get there. We're doing this. And then the federal government came back and said, you know what? No. There was another case filed. The Supreme Court came back and they said in Brown versus the Board 2, you have to do this now. You cannot stall. You cannot delay. You do not get to control this anymore. This has to be done now. And so they said, get it done. Okay. And so people will fight rulings. There's always going to be people that disagree with the ruling. There's always going to be people that interpret it differently than the way that you see it. And that's when the selective incorporation in the states will really come into play. So let's look at the First Amendment. Okay, so the First Amendment, and don't write anything yet, but when you look at the actual text of the First Amendment specifically states, let me find my page, Amendment 1, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay, now stop and think about that. There's not any meat there. It's straight. It's to the point. And we're like, what? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, how does it apply in this situation? How does it apply? And what we specifically know is Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. Okay, that is there. Or prohibiting the free exercise of a religion. So when you look at that, you say, okay, so Congress cannot set up a way that religions become a religion in our country. They cannot address that. They cannot help or hurt. They cannot ban a religion if it's practiced in free exercise. They cannot prohibit it. Okay, so that means that if you want to start up the Jedi school church, as long as you're doing it in a way that is not like killing people and breaking other laws, Congress has to leave you alone. And for the record, there is an actual Jedi church that started out of London in England, and I believe like in some of the bigger cities they have one. But we can't prohibit satanic churches. Even though most of you guys probably think satanic church is not a good church and would not want it in your neighborhood, Congress cannot ban that church. They can ban actions. So you cannot have human sacrifices. That's murder. You cannot do this. You cannot do that. But they cannot ban the church as a whole. Okay, and there's actually one of the cases that you have to understand is the Lemon case, and it deals with the Lemon test. And so this is the general rule for when the government can get involved in religion. So the government can get involved in a religious situation as long as it has a significant non-religious or secular purpose. So the government can do things involving religion as long as there's a non-religious purpose. And it does not have the primary effect of advancing or inhibiting that religion. And it does not foster excessive entanglement between the government and the religion. So the government cannot intentionally try to promote Christian values. That would be non-secular. It cannot potentially try to promote satanic values. Okay, so it can't have that purpose. It cannot have the impact, and those first two kind of go hand in hand of advancing or inhibiting one religion over the other. And then it has to try to stay out. It has to try to stay away. Okay, so when you look at different religion cases and you look at what's going on with the case, religion in our country, the government largely takes this a hands-off approach and says, we're going to stay away from this. We're not going to foster excessive entanglement because that's what the Lemon test tells us to do. Okay, so to give you a couple examples of when the government has decided to get involved with religion. Okay, you had a case, and this was a while ago, out of Appalachia. There is a Christian group of people in Appalachia that they, during the week of Easter, handle live rattlesnakes. And a part of this ceremony where they handle live rattlesnakes, they have this belief that if the snake bites you, it's a test of faith. If the snake doesn't bite you, then you pass the test of faith. Okay, and it's to show whether or not you lived a well life and you repent and all those other things. And the federal government says, hey, you know what? You can do that. But there's a challenge. What if they're 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old? And the federal government came in and said, you can do that as an adult all you want. You can handle live rattlesnakes. You can sleep with live rattlesnakes in the name of religion. That's fine. But you cannot force anyone under the age of 18 to get involved in that practice. You cannot force kids to handle live rattlesnakes. You have to make that choice as an adult. Okay? And that falls under the lemon test. They weren't doing it for a religious purpose. They were doing it because they're trying to protect kids. Okay? They did not want to advance or hurt either religion, and that doesn't. I mean, it just affects the children involved in that religion. And it really limits, it's not getting overly involved. It's a general rule of thumb. That's pretty clear, so that you don't have a ton of things back and forth. And that's what the lemon test is really about. Now you have situations where, well, how does the government handle prayer at school? Well, the school is a government body. It's an agent of the government. And so the government cannot have the primary effect of advancing and inhibiting a religion. Schools cannot advance or inhibit a religion. It's not that we're banning religion. The school cannot be involved. You can pray all you want. You can wear religious symbols. You can talk to people in casual conversations. I, as the teacher, the school cannot promote one religion over another. We can talk in academic terms all we want about religion. That is protected. We talk about, Roe versus Wade and pro-life, pro-choice. We can talk about the religious arguments in an academic sense. But I cannot, as a teacher, promote or try to put down any religion. And that's where you run into a lot of the issues when it comes to like prayers before football games or over the loudspeakers or religious groups during the school day. Students can do whatever they want. We, as an agent of the government, have the limits there, and that falls under the lemon test. Okay, so you see a big deal about this, and you hear people get up in arms, and you hear people talk about it, and a lot of it is a double standard. A lot of it is that we want our beliefs to be promoted because we view them as right, and we have issues with other beliefs. And that's where freedom of religion is so important, is the main goal is to protect your right to believe and carry out your faith in any way, shape, or form, regardless of the public at hand. There was a situation a few years ago in, I don't know if it's Dearborn, Deer Park, Michigan, something like that. There's a school district up in Michigan that is like 99% Muslim. And a couple of years ago, Ramadan, the month where they fast from sunup to sundown, fell during football season. And so their school board, their coaches and their high school came and said, hey, look, we got all these kids that they're going from sunup to sundown without eating. We want to move football practices because if they come out on that football field with no energy and no food, they're going to kill themselves. They're going to get hurt. So can we go ahead and let them go home and bring them back at 8 o'clock? The sun's down, they can eat a big dinner, and they can come back and practice with proper nutrition. And the school board said, yeah, we're doing this to protect the safety of the kids, so you can practice from 10 o'clock or not 8 o'clock at night to 10 o'clock at night, and then send them back home, and they can go to sleep, come to school the next day. No issue, no problem. It wasn't promoting one religion over another, it was protecting the safety of the kids. It was not trying to entangle the government, everything was sent out of the kids. Well, this story got on Fox News, and it blew up. It was on CNN, MSNBC, and the liberals were out there. This is what it's supposed to be like. They have the right to do this. Everything's right. The conservative Christians that don't like Islam, this is America. You shouldn't be promoting your ideas. You're giving them special treatment for their faith. You'd never do this for a Christian. Well, yeah, you're right. There's no aspect of Christianity that asks you to fast all day. So you would never have to do this for a Christian. It just isn't necessary. That doesn't mean that you're giving the Islamic people special treatment. That just means that you're dealing with the situation at hand and trying to protect the best interest of kids. Okay? And that's a big part of this debate. And my 15 minutes is about up. So I'm going to go ahead and hit pause here, stop, come back to this in a second. Mr. Wolf will load up the last video that you guys have today.